Welcome everyone to My Life, My Business. Wish I was here. And our focus is really about enjoying this journey of life itself. Now, whether you want to pursue it in a career sense or a business sense, organizational sense, or just generally in a life sense, hopefully our choice of topics will inspire you to re-engage with your life fully, not just some aspects but all aspects. And today we have Shanaaz who's going to be sharing with us, and we have been really touching on many different ways of engaging. And last week we spoke a little bit about the psychology of persuasion, and hopefully you can either listen to the playback on Clubhouse, or you can access the recording, the podcast on our channel, YouTube channel, the Mufasa Coaching Practice. So, without further ado, Shanaaz, most welcome to you as usual, as we continue this collaboration of imparting wisdom and sowing seeds of hope and inspiration in people's lives. I can't wait to hear what you've come prepared with today. Over to you.
Hi, Jacques. Thank you so much. And so I was really torn today between two things that I wanted to talk about. In terms of just the questions and the persuasion bit, and I had a few. I chuckled with you regarding the relationships, and and also a bit about the manipulation part. I used to always joke and say I'm like the most gullible person around. So it was a relief to hear that there are others like me too. So, but we can use that to our advantage also. So, thank you. So, that was the one topic. And then the other topic was that what I'm going to be talking about. So, the only thing related to the discussion, I guess, is the idea of questions. And asking people questions. So I think that for me, I felt compelled to talk about. I'm going to talk about an alternative trauma checklist. And the reason why I wanted to talk about this today is that there's no way that we can deny how the world has shifted with the events over the past week. And whichever side, whichever whatever your persuasion in terms of your beliefs and also your thinking about the world, but there's no way that what we've been exposed to via social media and what we see happening has affected us. But you know what, this is really about hope. Jacques, you mentioned that we want to instill hope, and so what I my area of specialism is trauma, but I do it in a different way, because I'm one of those. I believe in that school of thought that says that we can grow out of the traumatic experiences. There's actually a term for it. It's called salutogenesis. But I'm not going to talk about that term today, but just this idea. And we've also been talking about resilience. And as I look, there are times that I just have to switch off while I'm like completely, because of my field of work, I'm completely obsessive about keeping up to abreast of all the debates going on. But there's a part of me that is also aware that some of these events that we've seen and the violence that we've seen, etc., may have triggered something in us in terms of our own past and events that have happened with yourself. I've also, I mean, we've in Cape Town, particularly, we've come through some violent taxi protests. And I'm still working with some people and colleagues about processing what has happened to them. We live in a violent society, unfortunately. But how do we find those moments of joy in the midst of all of this? And so I've used this tool. It's a checklist. I've used this tool in a range of different settings. To engage people and help them process some of the traumatic experiences that they've been through, whether it is a hijack, or whether it is the pandemic, or whether it's gang violence. And time and time again, I'm just amazed how people respond to this. And I want to encourage all of you, for those who are in leadership, for those mentoring people, that this is such a useful tool and anyone can use it. So it's not, you don't have to be a therapist, you don't have to be, trained in a particular field of psychology or social work or life coaching. If you are interested in supporting people, even your own family members, this is something that you can use. And the Dulwich Center, which created this, it's in the narrative. One of the areas that I often speak about is narrative therapy or collective narrative practice. I've spoken a bit about this before. So I just want to introduce you to some of this in this time that we are going through, when you are looking around you and you're thinking, do I need to raise kids? I need to teach a young generation. When I'm busy teaching, I need to see people in counseling in the midst of all of this. And so I'm going to go through what would usually happen. So initially, if you would go and see someone to regarding trauma, debriefing or counseling regarding trauma, they would usually have a checklist where they list your symptoms. So they would ask you, we're talking about questions. And so they would ask you things about the symptoms. It could be around something like, how are you sleeping? Do you have headaches? Do you feel isolated from others? Do you often feel lonely? Do you have you often cried without knowing why you're crying? Do you often get the feeling that feelings of guilt, etc. So they have a list that they would ask you if you would go, if you had to go and seek counseling, and they assess you to see, are you experience traumatic stress. And what the people who invented the alternative trauma checklist, that's what it's called, what they did was that they felt that often we only and I'm not bad mouthing psychologists, but often the way the helping profession has been trained has often been to look at symptoms and to look at pathology. So the things that are going wrong, the symptoms that you are experiencing. And there was very little acknowledgement that you can go through something traumatic, but you can also grow from it, you can also learn from it, you can also survive it, and how you survive that is sometimes important. And so they decided that they would come up with this alternative checklist, because what they also found was that while we experience traumatic events and while we experience events that may be highly stressful for us, there is more to us than just the stress or the traumatic event. And they felt that what they would like then is to help people while acknowledging the effects of the event, the traumatic event, but also acknowledge the ways the people survived this traumatic event. Also, think about the kind of things, the kindness and the bravery the person displayed during this event. And for me, I just recall your story with the motorbike accident, Jacques, and I remember people came to you and supported you, with the accident, etc. And sometimes when we experience a traumatic event, we can sometimes forget the other side, that maybe for the first time you realize, wow, people actually care. Despite everything going on in our country, there are good Samaritans that will come out and support you. Or even in that moment, some of us, if you've been involved in an accident or in a traumatic event, you are looking out for the next person. Are they okay? But often what we find is that when we do go in counseling, this isn't really mentioned. So what they actually then did was they decided that they would think about some of the principles that go into this checklist, and I'm going to go through the checklist with you guys, but I'm just wanting to just explain a little bit of what lies behind the checklist, and you can think of of a traumatic event when we do when I go through some of the questions. When you can think of a traumatic event or a stressful event that you or your family experienced. So the principles then behind this alternative checklist was that they, as I said, they didn't only want us when we work with people, they don't only want us to engage with people around their traumatic stories or what had happened to them or the adversity, but also how brave they were to survive it, how they protected themselves, how despite the what was happening in their environment, how kind they were. That's one of the most important descriptions, right? Because we are more than just our story. We have multiple stories to tell about ourselves and our families and our communities. Another way is to what they call to richly acknowledge the real effects of the stress that they had experienced. So often, when we are going down the resilient route, and I find that sometimes some people, because we love the concept of resilience, which I do, of course, and we love this idea that we can overcome difficult circumstances. We what I find is that sometimes the real effects of the traumatic event gets overlooked also, or doesn't get acknowledged. So in other words, if we are mentoring and working with people, we can't only focus on how amazing they were at that they got through the difficult time, but we also need to spend time listening to the real effects of how that event took place and how they experienced the event and how that event had an impact on them. So as I said, to find that balance, because we can just want to overlook that and not want to go there. So the idea with the alternative checklist is definitely not to only focus on the happy moments. And I always recall sometimes when I'm working with loss, and in particular religions, they want you to celebrate the person's life. You don't have to cry, you don't have to do all of that. But you know what, sometimes we do need to understand the loss that people experience. We do need to give people the opportunity to, even though it may be difficult for us to hear some of the difficult times or the traumatic events, we do need to give them that space. The other thing is that what they suggest is that we want to link the individual to some sort of collective and history. And often, what we find in the people that we work with, that incident that they experience is not an individual story, it's often a collective story. In other words, there are many stories like that, and if we can link them to a group or a history of that event. So I'll give you an example. So how many people throughout of traumatic circumstances begin to change the world by starting up organizations that are sort of anti what they experienced. So, someone who starts up an organization for drug addicts because her son was a drug addict and passed on, unfortunately. So, in other words, when people share their stories with us of the trauma or of the stressful time, it is always important to link them up with a collective, because it's through the collective that they can also find healing and meaning. And sometimes I think we forget that. Um, and the collective can be anything. It can be an organization. It can be support. It can be it can be joining existing groups, and that can really add meaning and value to the person's experience. So the other thing is that what they suggest is that see the person or whoever you're meeting with as representing a social issue, that it's always broader than them. And it's similar to this idea of the collective, right? So, and I know we've been talking about the tribe. What you often find is that when people experience stress and trauma, they often feel isolated. So, when you see the individual as representing a social issue, you help address some of the isolation. You help make them connection with the bigger story, in other words, and that is really helpful. Another principle that is important is, which I've mentioned before, is this idea to help them link them up with a local collective initiative. And then finally is this idea to allow people to speak through us, not just to us. And I like that idea because often when people come with their stories, we, for many of us, we do have areas of influence. We do have a certain degree of say in, in a range of different opportunity. I'm, for example, exposed to a range of different opportunities where I can make a difference in someone's life, and it's such a privilege. And so when someone comes to talk to me about the traumatic experience, then I can think about how do I let this person not only talk to me but talk through me, and think of how do I take this on board for them. How do we make this a broader issue, that the problem or whatever they're experiencing is not located inside of them, but it becomes part of a broader issue that I can take up. So those are some of the principles behind. So here are some of the questions that I'm going to go through. So this, you can adapt this to any stressful event or traumatic event. So it's divided into three parts, right? The first part is things that you did or experiences that you had during the incident, right? So if you kind of think of a traumatic event of someone that you know, or someone that you work with, or yourself. So one of the first questions is, and how the checklist work is that you're supposed to answer once, more than once, or many times. But for now, you don't have to do that. I'm just going to go through some of the questions, and hope that it will open up your idea to how to engage with people in this really stressful time that we're experiencing in the world, whether it's having to explain to a young child about what they're seeing when they hear about, war, etc. So during the event that you've experienced, um, tell me about how you try to protect yourself during this event. How you try to protect yourself physically and or emotionally. Right, so that's one of the things. And maybe I will use, for example, I will use my mom's passing on. So I think that I try to protect myself by I actually think that I did this a few weeks before my mom passed. I connected with her, and I we spoke, and she was going, through a difficult time. But I felt that, I made my peace with her, and I asked her that, explained that I'm really sorry that, we didn't necessarily look after the way she expected us to look after, but I loved her, etc. And so in that way, I think I protected myself emotionally. But for others, if there's a physical thing, think about how did you protect yourself physically. The next question is displayed acts of caring, concern, or comfort for others during the incident. It could be included caring for children or other adults. So at that time, I think that I supported some of the people in church who were very attached to my mom. And I kind of was able, because I was able to deal with my own stuff, I was able to show them that. One of the other questions are received comfort from others during the incident. And I'm going to repeat that, received comfort from others during the incident. So often, when we're working with individuals who are experiencing trauma, for those of us who are leaders and managers, etc. I've experienced, we often find it hard because we are so busy caretaking, hard to receive comfort, or in a sense, and some people will go sympathy from others. And I had a conversation with someone, and they said to me, no, they don't want people to feel sorry for them. So sometimes it's about being curious about that. Sometimes one of the best things about being able to enjoy life and being able to make the most out of difficult situations and coming out on the other side of a traumatic event is actually allowing yourself to receive comfort. Um, one of my favorites, which worked so well with a group of young people I worked with, was displayed acts of bravery during the attack. So I worked with a group of young people who were exposed to gang violence, and one of them said that during the gang violence, the incidents that happened, they were still able to go to school. And for me, that was just amazing, because what actually happened was that these were young children who, despite the shooting happening in the area, they decided that the education was still important for them. So I'd like you to think of yourself, what in that traumatic experience or stressful time that you had gone through, what acts of bravery did you display? Another one is, how did you find, or did you encourage others during this incident? And another one is, how did you try to stay connected to others during this time, or during the attack, for example, or during the incident? An additional question under the section is, how did you find ways to stay in touch with what is precious to yourself and about life during this time? So if it was a protracted event, how do I stay in touch with the loss of my mother? Keep thinking about what is precious to me or important to me during this period. And I think for me, it is about think reflecting on my mom's values, and she had some really important things to teach me, and that I continue to kind of engage and see how I continue living out her legacy and my parents' legacy, in other words. So the second part is afterward. So a trauma checklist, they usually look at, what did you do during the stressful event? What did you do after the stressful event? And so this is also really good ways to think. If you're working with an individual, think about engaging with them on some of these things about after the event. Sometimes I find we often forget that we need to have engage with people and ask questions about people after the initial traumatic or stressful period. So some of the questions here could be, how did you make plans to rebuild what was destroyed? And I was thinking of you, Jacques. How did you make plans to rebuild, your clients that you perhaps, with during the time that you were in hospital or in the wheelchair? What kind of plans did you make to rebuild kind of the momentum that you had lost? Another one could be, how did you display acts of dignity or pride despite living with the stressful event? And I really like this one as well, because often my experience has been, I'm going to mention it again, repeat it again at least. Displaying acts of dignity or pride despite living in the midst of this incident or stressful event. What I find is that it's important to ask people this question, because often people that we work with, the trauma or the stressful event makes them feel powerless, and it may also make them feel slightly humiliated. And so, but what we often don't realize is that people are resilient. There is an aspect to us that want to, we have the natural tendency to want to show our dignity and show, that we are okay through this, but it's about finding that balance. So those are one of the questions about after the attack. Um, and then another one is, which I absolutely love asking people, is how did you, or how were you able to find joy in the small moments within life? So I'll repeat it again. How did you find joy after this event? Even if it was in small moments. The other question, which I also really like, when we're talking, and because we often just want, often I find that when people are going through traumatic experiences and stressful events, for some of them, they get caught up in the powerlessness and the humiliation, or that there's nothing that they can do. But when we ask them these questions, in terms of, again, asking the right questions, the other question is, how are you able to connect with humor or irony in life? And I enjoy, as I said, I enjoy asking these two questions because it immediately shifts the conversation to something that they can actually look forward to, or they can share with me, other than just the traumatic event. So the last question is really about, how did you link through song, music, prayer, or art, or in live out, or how do you plan to live out your hopes and dreams after this event? And so that is basically the questions that you would want to ask. And what I have found is that this, instead of asking people about their symptoms, about the traumatic event, that these questions elicit such valuable and different responses from people that really helps them to heal. And I know the time is up. I've just got one thing to kind of say. For example, one of the kids that I worked with, she said, I was proud of myself when I threw water on the fire and myself, because I remembered what my grandfather told me. And this was a 10-year-old girl. So for this 10-year-old girl who was completely powerless, there was a fire that broke out in the back where they were living, and she remembered what her grandfather taught her, and she was proud of herself. And so I just love this way of working with people, and I hope that you would find it useful and valuable as well. Thank you.
Each question demands for it to be really unpacked even further. But anyway, we we're not going to do that. But just to say, thank you, Shanaaz. I just want to remind everybody listening to this, it's the essential encouragement is how to grow through your traumatic experience, and we all go through types of traumatic experiences, and probably have in the past, etc. And I've spoken about mine, and basically what I've learned through them. But actually, um, dealing with unpacking um, what your trauma is all about. Now, Shanaaz, you said that many people subscribe to the fact that, I mean, maybe I'm even one of those, is have a celebration, be grateful and move on. But often people would say, but you need to kind of just maybe stay in that place of healing, recovery. You need to sit in it a bit. And for me, for a person who's so focused on moving on, these questions provide you with the framework of actually just pausing long enough for self-reflection, and then isolating those areas of growth. I mean, there are so many things here. So just the two things, Shanaaz, was when you said, don't let people just talk to you, but let them talk through you. Is become, and how I interpret that is become a champion for the person, because the person has got an experience, but also the person represents a much bigger issue, and take up the fight, become a champion. And the other thing, of course, I would be inspired by is how trauma gives you exposure to the Samaritans, the good Samaritans in your life, and allowing those good Samaritans to impact your life, and not to say, I don't want to share my experience with anybody because I don't want their pity. And then, you deprive yourself of so much when you take on that approach, when you have that attitude to it. It's like, no, you reminded that we live in a system that community is important. You spoke constantly is linking, being connected, bonding, synergy, synthesis, blending, are all the things that I've heard. So anyway, yeah, no, thank you, Shanaaz. This was absolutely brilliant.
Thank you,
Well,
everyone.
thank you. So until next week, have a great week, everyone listening to this. And by the way, is once again, I will encourage you, take something out of the talk and apply it and experience the difference and the change. And as you learn, teach others. No better way to embed it and internalize it within yourself. Bye for now.